Miguel Hernandez clutched his first-class ticket, heart pounding as the gate agent's eyes skimmed over his brown skin before dismissing him without a word. "Economy's that way," she snapped, not bothering to verify his boarding pass. At 16, he'd faced prejudice before, but never this blatant, never with 14-year-old Lucia watching wide-eyed beside him. The siblings stood their ground, only to have security called, a supervisor summoned, and their dignity stripped away beneath the fluorescent airport lights. The airline staff smirked, confident in their power, never suspecting these teenagers were about to shatter their world with a single message. For while Miguel and Lucia appeared vulnerable, they possessed the one thing that truly mattered in corporate America: a father named Carlos Hernandez, the airline's majority owner, whose response to his children's mistreatment would transform an industry overnight. What does it take for justice to prevail in a system designed to silence those who don't fit a narrow definition of belonging? How many quiet humiliations must accumulate before the dam finally breaks, releasing a flood that washes away decades of normalized discrimination? Before we continue with this powerful story, I'd love if you could subscribe to our story Hispanic, where we share narratives that reflect our diverse experiences. Stay with me until the end, as this tale contains lessons about dignity, power, and the courage to stand up for what's right that will resonate deeply with anyone who has ever felt invisible in a world that refuses to see them. The morning light streamed through the windows of the modest suburban home as Miguel Hernandez stuffed the last of his clothes into his carry-on bag. At 16, he was tall for his age, with a quiet intensity that made people notice him even when he wasn't trying to be noticed. His sister Lucia, 14 and artistic to her core, was already waiting by the door, her sketchbook tucked under her arm as always. "You got everything?" asked Tia Elena, their godmother, her eyes misting over slightly. "First aid kit, chargers, emergency contacts." "Yes, Tia Elena," Lucia said with a gentle smile. "We've gone over the list 3 times. Elena pulled them both into a tight embrace. "Your father would be so proud seeing you two heading off on your own like this. He's worked so hard to give you these opportunities." Miguel nodded, his expression serious. "We know. That's why we're not going to mess it up." For the past decade, Elena had raised them while their father, Carlos Hernandez, built his business empire overseas. The siblings had seen him only during holidays and brief visits, but his presence remained constant through video calls and the opportunities he provided. This trip, their first solo journey to visit him at his newest acquisition, felt like a milestone, a recognition of their growing maturity. "The car's here," Miguel announced, peering through the curtains as a sleek black sedan pulled into the driveway. Elena fussed over them one last time, straightening Miguel's collar and tucking a strand of hair behind Lucia's ear. "Remember what your father always says: stand tall, speak clearly, and never let anyone make you feel small," the siblings recited in unison, a mantra they'd grown up hearing. Elena kissed them both on the forehead. "Text me when you land, and Miguel, watch out for your sister." "Always do," he replied, grabbing both their suitcases. The drive to the airport was filled with excited chatter about what they would do first when they arrived. Lucia wanted to visit the art district their father had mentioned, while Miguel was more interested in seeing the tech hub that had attracted so many investors to the region. "Dad said there's this innovation center where they're testing next-generation communication systems," Miguel said, eyes bright with enthusiasm. "I want to check out their security protocols." Lucia rolled her eyes affectionately. "Of course you do, Mr. Hacker. I just want to see the murals in the old quarter." Dad said some of them date back 100 years. As they approached the departure terminal, Miguel checked their tickets on his phone one more time. "First class, gate A17, boarding in 2 hours. We've got plenty of time." The siblings thanked their driver and entered the bustling airport with the confidence that came from frequent family trips. Despite this being their first big journey alone, Miguel led the way, navigating through the crowd toward the first-class check-in counter. As they approached the premium line, a gate agent with bleached blonde hair and a tight smile looked them up and down. Her name tag read Melissa. Without checking their tickets, she gestured toward the economy line several yards away. "Regular check-in is over there," she said crisply. Miguel stopped, confused. "We're flying first class." He held up his phone to show their boarding passes. Melissa's smile tightened. "I'm sorry, but that line is for verified first-class passengers only." We are verified first-class passengers, Miguel insisted, keeping his voice even despite the frustration beginning to build. Our father booked these tickets weeks ago. Melissa leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. Look, those tickets look unusual. They might be fake boarding passes. It happens more than you'd think. Lucia tugged at her brother's sleeve. Miguel, maybe we should just know, Miguel said firmly. We have every right to be in this line. He tried to remain calm, remembering his father's advice about handling difficult situations discreetly. He tapped his smartwatch, activating its recording function. Melissa's eyes narrowed. I'm going to need to verify these. Wait here. She walked away, speaking quietly into her headset. Miguel and Lucia exchanged glances. A few feet away, a white family with teenagers approached the same first-class line and was welcomed with a warm smile by another agent. Did you see that? Miguel whispered. Lucia nodded, her artist's eye missing nothing. Different tone, different body language, different everything. Melissa returned moments later with a practiced smile and a man in a crisp uniform beside her. This is Officer Reeves. He'll need to verify your documentation in a more private area. By now, other passengers were staring. An older white woman in a designer coat whispered audibly to her husband, probably trying to sneak in again. Happens all the time. Miguel felt his chest tighten but kept his voice steady. We're not going anywhere private. Our tickets are valid. You can verify them right here. Officer Reeves, a stocky man with thinning hair and tired eyes, sighed as if this was routine. Kids, we're just trying to avoid disrupting other passengers. Let's step aside and sort this out properly. Lucia, always the peacemaker, looked ready to comply, but Miguel stood his ground. We're not kids. We're paying customers with valid tickets. The tension was interrupted by the arrival of another man, older with a receding hairline and a supervisor's badge that read Richard. His face was flushed with barely contained irritation. What seems to be the problem here? He asked, though his tone suggested he'd already decided who was causing the trouble. Melissa quickly explained. These two insist they have first-class tickets, but the passes look suspicious. They're refusing verification. Richard didn't even look at the siblings as he spoke. Look, you're causing a scene here. Either step aside with Officer Reeves, or wait outside until we can properly verify your booking. Miguel held up his phone again. Our booking confirmation is right here. Our father purchased these tickets directly from your airline's executive portal. Executive portal? Richard scoffed. Right, and I'm the CEO. Our ID matches the names on the tickets. Lucia added quietly, pulling out her driver's license. Richard finally glanced at them, his gaze dismissive. Even if these tickets are somehow real, which I doubt, there's clearly been some kind of mistake. This class of service, it's not. Well, it's not what you're used to. The implication hung in the air, unmistakable. Miguel felt his fists clench at his sides. He wanted to shout, to demand respect, but years of his father's cautioning held him back. Making a scene would only reinforce their prejudices. We've shown you everything you need, Miguel said, his voice tight. Either check us in or get your manager. Richard's face hardened. I am the floor supervisor, and I'm telling you to step aside. Wait outside, or security will remove you from the terminal entirely. Lucia's eyes widened with alarm. Miguel could feel her trembling slightly beside him. Fine, Miguel said, his voice dangerously calm. We'll step aside. As they moved away from the counter, Miguel pulled out his phone and opened a secure messaging app his father had given it to him years ago, saying, "Use this if you ever need me immediately. No matter where I am, I'll respond." He typed a brief message, *airport, first-class counter, racial profiling, recording everything. No immediate response came through. Miguel pocketed his phone and looked at his sister. Lucia forced a smile. Ever the optimist. Let's try to fix this ourselves first. Dad's probably in meetings. They walked toward a quieter area of the terminal, both aware of the security officer still watching them from a distance. This isn't right, Miguel muttered. I'm not letting this go. I know, Lucia replied softly, but right now we need to be smart about how we handle it. Chapter 2, Witnesses to Indignity. The siblings found a bench near some vending machines, away from the crowded gates, but still within view of their departure screen. Lucia pulled out her sketchbook, her way of processing emotion, while Miguel began researching airline policies on his phone, determined to find their next move. On the pages of Lucia's sketchbook, harsh lines began to form the scene they just experienced. Miguel noticed her hand trembling slightly. "You okay?" he asked gently. Lucia nodded, not looking up. "Just angry, but I'd rather put it down on paper than let it eat me up inside." Miguel squeezed her shoulder. "Smart girl. Dad would be proud." He returned to his phone, pulling up passenger rights documents and taking screenshots of key sections. "There's got to be something here we can use." Nearby, a family with young children watched them with barely disguised curiosity. Miguel overheard the mother whispering something about unaccompanied minors and security concerns. "They think we're troublemakers," Lucia whispered, also noticing the stares. "Let them think what they want." Miguel replied. "We know the truth." His phone suddenly vibrated, a news alert about flight delays due to weather conditions at their destination. Miguel's heart sank. If the flight was delayed, they'd be stuck here even longer. "I'm going to check the status board," he told Lucia. "Stay here, okay?" As Miguel approached the large digital display, he noticed Officer Reeves speaking with another security guard while glancing in his direction. They were being watched. Miguel pretended not to notice, scanning the board for their flight information. No delays posted yet, but several other flights to nearby cities had been pushed back by hours. When he returned to the bench, Lucia was no longer alone. An elderly Latina woman in a wheelchair had positioned herself nearby and was engaged in conversation with his sister. Just like that, every single time, the woman was saying as Miguel approached, "40 years of flying, and they still act like I don't belong. This is my brother Miguel," Lucia said, gesturing as he sat down. "Miguel, this is Mrs. Carmen Vasquez. She's having the same problem we are." Carmen Vasquez had the kind of dignified presence that commanded respect without asking for it. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and though her body might have weakened with age, her eyes were sharp and alert, missing nothing. "Pleased to meet you, young man," she said, extending a hand adorned with a single gold ring. "Your sister was just telling me about your encounter with our friends at the counter." Miguel shook her hand. "You too, ma'am. Sounds like you've been dealing with the same thing." Carmen chuckled, but there was little humor in it. "Child, I've been dealing with this since before your parents were born. They moved me from the first-class lounge, claiming they needed to verify my status. Been waiting here for 40 minutes while white passengers walk right in." "That's horrible," Lucia said, her brow furrowing with indignation. "It's life," Carmen replied, matter-of-factly. "But that doesn't mean we accept it." She looked Miguel up and down. "You remind me of my grandson." Same fire in the eyes. Miguel smiled despite his frustration. "My dad always says that fire is good as long as you control it, not the other way around." "Smart man, your father. Is he meeting you at your destination?" "That's the plan," Lucia said. "It's our first trip to see him in his new location. He's been working overseas." As they spoke, a young Latino man in a janitor's uniform approached, pushing his cleaning cart. He slowed as he neared them, glancing around before speaking in a low voice. "Don't mean to interrupt, but I heard what happened. This happens all the time." He introduced himself as Diego. "My cousin Maria works customer service, not the front desk, the real one, where they can actually help." Here he slipped them a small piece of paper with a name and terminal location. "Ask for Gabriela. She doesn't play their games." Before they could thank him properly, Diego was moving on, but not before discreetly leaving a few packaged snacks on the bench beside them. "Well," Carmen said with a small smile, "it seems not everyone here is cut from the same cloth." Miguel opened his phone to check their ticket status and froze. What the hell? The screen displayed their booking information with a glaring update. "Cancelled due to verification failure." "We didn't cancel anything," Lucia said, peering over his shoulder. "No, but someone did." Miguel's tech savvy, honed through years of coding and system design lessons online, kicked into high gear. He opened a developer portal on his phone and began working through a series of commands. "What are you doing?" Carmen asked, watching his fingers fly across the screen. "Accessing the airline's mobile back-end. Most companies have security flaws in their apps if you know where to look." His face lit up with grim satisfaction. satisfaction. Got it. Someone manually altered our ticket status at 9:42 a.m. right after we walked away from the counter. He took screenshots of the time stamp and user ID, storing them securely. Evidence, he muttered. We're going to need it. I think we should try that customer service desk Diego mentioned, Lucia suggested. Maybe Gabriela can help restore our tickets. They helped Carmen navigate toward the central terminal where Gabriela supposedly worked. As they moved, Miguel became aware of two security guards casually following them at a distance. Don't look back, he whispered to Lucia, who had noticed the same thing. Just keep walking normally. Carmen, sensing their tension, spoke calmly. Been shadowed more times than I can count. Straight backs, steady pace. Give them nothing to work with. The main customer service hub was crowded with frustrated travelers dealing with delays and cancellations. After waiting in line for 20 minutes, they reached the desk, only to be met by a young man with a harried expression. Not Gabriela. Gabriela's on break, he said, after they asked for her. I can help you. His name tag read Kevin. Miguel explained their situation, showing him the screenshots of their altered ticket status. Kevin's eyes widened momentarily before his face settled into practiced neutrality. I'm sorry, but it looks like our system is experiencing issues right now. I can't access your booking. His fingers never touched his keyboard. His eyes never looked at his screen. The lie was so transparent that even Lucia's patience began to wear thin. You didn't even try to look it up, she pointed out. Kevin's smile remained fixed. Like I said, system issues. Maybe try again in a few hours. Next, please. As they stepped away from the desk, Carmen sighed heavily. I need to rest these old bones for a bit. You two go on. I'll wait here. We're not leaving you, Lucia insisted, her natural compassion overriding her own frustration. They found a row of seats where Carmen could rest while they regrouped. Miguel continued working on his phone, trying different approaches to recover their ticket information. Lucia decided to go get some water for Carmen, who was looking increasingly tired. I'll be right back, she promised, heading toward a nearby cafe. As she approached the cafe, Lucia overheard familiar voices around the corner. Melissa, the gate agent from earlier, was speaking to another airline employee. Instinctively, Lucia slowed her pace, staying just out of sight. Can't believe they actually thought they could pull it off, Melissa was saying with a laugh. What kind of rich dad lets their street kids run wild like this? Probably stole someone's credit card to book those tickets. Did you see their faces when Richard showed up? The other employee responded. Priceless. He's got a reputation for handling these situations. By these situations you mean? Melissa's voice lowered. You know exactly what I mean, came the reply, followed by more laughter. Lucia stood frozen, the conversation burning into her memory. She wanted to confront them, to defend her family's dignity, but years of careful conditioning held her back. Instead, she quickly grabbed water bottles and returned to Miguel and Carmen, her hands shaking slightly. What's wrong? Miguel asked immediately, noticing her distress. Lucia hesitated, glancing at Carmen. I overheard Melissa talking. She called us street kids and implied we stole someone's credit card to book the tickets. Miguel's expression darkened. Did you record it? No, I wasn't prepared. Lucia looked down. I should have, but I was too shocked. Carmen reached out and patted Lucia's hand. You did fine, child. Sometimes the most powerful thing is just to witness and remember. Miguel nodded, though his jaw was tight with anger. I'm going to check if Dad responded yet. He pulled out his phone and checked the secure messaging app. Still no response. He'll answer, Lucia said with confidence she didn't entirely feel. He always does, eventually. Chapter 3. The collapse. Miguel was about to reply, when Carmen suddenly straightened in her wheelchair. I need to use the restroom. Would you mind helping me get there, dear? Of course, Lucia said. I'll take you. No need to both come, Carmen insisted. I'm sure this young man has plenty to do with his investigation. I just need a push to get there, then I can manage. Reluctantly, Miguel stayed behind with their belongings, while Lucia wheeled Carmen toward the nearest restrooms. The lines were long, and a sign indicated that the accessible stall was out of order. Maybe we should try another restroom, Lucia suggested. Carmen shook her head. This will have to do. I'll just need to stand for a bit. They waited their turn, but when they reached the front of the line, line, a TSA agent approached them. "Wheelchair needs to go through separate screening," he said abruptly. "I'm just taking her to the restroom," Lucia explained. "Policy," the agent insisted. "She needs to stand and walk through the scanner." "She can't stand for long periods," Lucia protested. The exchange grew heated, drawing attention from passers-by. Carmen, determined to maintain her dignity, attempted to stand as requested, but after being forced to wait several minutes for the agent to finish a conversation with a colleague, her legs gave way. "Mrs. Vasquez," Lucia cried as the elderly woman collapsed to the floor. The TSA agent looked panicked, suddenly realizing the severity of the situation. "I was just following protocol. Someone help," Lucia shouted, kneeling beside Carmen, who was conscious but clearly in distress. Miguel, who had followed at a distance to keep an eye on them, pushed through the gathering crowd. "What happened?" he demanded, immediately dropping to Carmen's side. "They made her stand too long," Lucia explained, tears welling in her eyes. "I told them she couldn't." Miguel looked up at the TSA agent with cold fury. "Call medical, now." The agent fumbled with his radio, finally calling for assistance. People stood watching but doing nothing as Carmen lay on the floor. Her breathing labored, but her eyes still alert. "I'm fine," she insisted, though she clearly wasn't. "Just need to catch my breath." EMTs arrived minutes later, quickly assessing Carmen's condition and helping her back into her wheelchair. "Blood pressure's elevated," one of them noted. "We should take her to the medical station for monitoring." As they prepared to move Carmen, Miguel felt a cold rage building within him, not the hot, impulsive anger of youth, but something deeper and more controlled. He raised his smartwatch again, recording everything, capturing the indifferent faces of the airline staff watching from a distance, the embarrassed but unapologetic expression of the TSA agent, the curious onlookers treating human suffering like a spectator sport. With deliberate precision, he composed another message to his father, **. You warned them once. Now it's your move." This time, his phone pinged almost immediately with a response, a single word from Carlos Hernandez, **engaged**. Miguel looked at Lucia, who was holding Carmen's hand and speaking softly to her as the EMTs prepared to take her to the airport's medical station. "What did Dad say?" Lucia asked, looking up at her brother with tear-streaked cheeks. "He's coming," Miguel replied, a grim smile spreading across his face, "and he's bringing the storm with him." Carmen, despite her discomfort, caught the exchange. "Your father," she said quietly. "Who exactly is he?" Miguel leaned down close to her ear. "Carlos Hernandez." Carmen's eyes widened slightly, recognition dawning. "The Carlos Hernandez of Vestige Holdings." Miguel nodded once, his expression solemn. A slow smile spread across Carmen's face. Well, she murmured. "This just got interesting." As the EMTs wheeled Carmen away, Lucia at her side, Miguel remained standing in the middle of the terminal, his posture straight and confident for the first time since they'd arrived. A single silent tear ran down his cheek, not of sadness or fear, but of righteous anger finally finding its purpose. He glanced toward the first-class check-in counter, where Melissa and Richard were now helping other passengers, oblivious to the forces aligning against them. Miguel allowed himself a small smile. "You should have just checked our tickets," he whispered to himself. "But now you'll have to answer to him." As Carmen was wheeled toward the medical station, Miguel and Lucia followed close behind, their original travel plans now completely derailed. Miguel's phone buzzed with a notification from the secure messaging app. Unlike the single-word response from before, this time it was a full message, **, facial recognition accessed, location confirmed, stay visible, do not engage further with staff, protect Carmen, I have eyes on you now, **. Miguel showed the message to Lucia, whose eyes widened. "Dad has access to the airport cameras," she whispered. "Dad has access to everything." Miguel replied with newfound confidence. "Remember when he told us about the backdoor protocols he built into his acquisitions?" Lucia nodded slowly. "I thought that was just him bragging." "Apparently not." Miguel pocketed his phone, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Now we wait." Miles away, in a sleek, windowless command center, Carlos Hernandez sat surrounded by monitor At 45, he had the lean, poised look of a man who had fought his way to success through sheer force of will. His dark eyes, so like Miguel's, scanned the displays with laser focus as his fingers flew across multiple keyboards. "Begin compliance audit sequence," he commanded into a headset. "Authorization code Isabel Phoenix, 7729. A female voice responded from the speakers. "Compliance audit initiated. Target systems, Atlantic Airways, access level, executive override." Carlos leaned back slightly as data began flooding his screens. Passenger manifests, employee records, security feeds from multiple airports nationwide. On one monitor, he could see his children sitting beside Carmen's hospital bed, Miguel's arm protectively around Lucia's shoulders. "Initiate Phase 1, Carlos said, his voice deadly calm. Protocol 17. Chapter 4, The Reckoning Back at the Airport. Miguel's phone pinged with an automated alert. He opened it to find a notification from the airline's app. Flight AA-129 delayed. New estimated departure, pending system verification. "Look," he showed Lucia. "It's starting." "What's starting?" Lucia asked, confusion clouding her features. Before Miguel could answer, more alerts began popping up on his phone. Flight delays spreading across the terminal like ripples in a pond. On the main departure board, status indicators flickered from green to yellow to red. Announcements began playing over the PA system about temporary system issues and verification protocols. "Dad's inside their system," Miguel whispered. "He's locking them out." Carmen, who had been listening from her hospital bed, chuckled softly despite her discomfort. "Your father isn't messing around, is he?" Across the airport, confusion was spreading. Passengers were lining up at information desks, demanding explanations for the sudden delays. Gate agents were frantically calling supervisors, who were calling managers, who were finding their access credentials suddenly invalid. At Atlantic Airways corporate headquarters, the situation was rapidly evolving from confusion to panic. In the main conference room, executives huddled around displays showing cascading system failures across their network. "What do you mean you can't override it?" demanded Victor Reynolds, the airline's chief operations officer. "You're the head of IT." The IT director, a harried-looking man with sweat staining his collar, shook his head frantically. "Someone's locked us out of our own systems. Every time we bypass one firewall, another one appears. It's like the system is rewriting itself in real time." "That's impossible," Victor snapped. "Systems don't rewrite themselves." Just then, every screen in the room flickered and went black. After a moment of stunned silence, white text began appearing on the dark background. Emergency compliance protocol activated by Vestige Holdings majority shareholder. Article 17, enforcement in progress. Stand by for system-wide audit. The room erupted in chaos. Vestige Holdings, isn't that Carlos Hernandez? Jesus Christ, why would he trigger an emergency compliance audit without warning? The CEO, William Palmer, a silver-haired man with a perpetual tan, slammed his hand on the table. "Someone get Hernandez on the phone right now." As the executive scrambled, a junior analyst quietly pulled up an archived news article on her tablet and slid it toward her supervisor. The headline read, "Tech mogul's wife dies after denied boarding. Airline cites as security concerns." The date was 10 years earlier. The airline was a smaller company that had since been acquired by Atlantic Airways. "Oh my God," the supervisor murmured, scanning the article. Hernandez's wife was profiled and denied boarding when she needed emergency medical attention. "She died waiting for another flight," the analyst added quietly. The supervisor looked up, face pale. "And now his children are being profiled at one of our gates. We're so screwed," the analyst whispered. In the airport medical center, Miguel was searching through archived news articles on his phone, his expression growing increasingly somber. "I never knew," he said quietly to Lucia, "about Mom, about how she died." Lucia leaned over to look at his screen, her artistic hands trembling slightly as she took in the headline. "Dad never told us the details, just that it was an accident." "It wasn't an accident," Miguel replied, his voice hard. "It was negligence and prejudice." He scrolled through more articles, absorbing the painful truth. She was denied boarding because they thought her diabetes emergency was suspicious behavior. By the time she got medical help, it was too late. Lucia's eyes filled with tears. And now it's happening again, to us, to Mrs. Vasquez. Carmen, who had been pretending to sleep, opened her eyes. Your mother's name was Isabel, wasn't it? I remember that case. It was one of the reasons I started advocating for travel rights. Miguel looked up, surprised. You knew about this, child. I've been fighting these battles for decades, Carmen said gently. Your mother's case was a landmark one for many of us. I just never made the connection to your father until now. Before they could discuss it further, Miguel's phone chimed with another alert. This one was different. A news notification. Asterisk breaking: Atlantic Airways grounds all flights for emergency system inspection. All flights. Lucia gasped. Dad shut down the entire airline. Miguel murmured, reading further. Look, air traffic control is redirecting their entire fleet. Planes already in the air are being diverted to the nearest airports. Carmen let out a low whistle. Your father isn't just sending a message. He's declaring war. Meanwhile, at the first-class check-in counter, Melissa was dealing with increasingly irate passengers as the system continued to malfunction. Her supervisor, Richard, approached with a thunderous expression. What the hell is going on? He demanded. Nothing's working. I don't know, Melissa replied, her composure cracking. The entire network is locked up. Richard lowered his voice. Listen, I just got word from upstairs. This might be connected to those two kids from earlier. Melissa stared at him. What? How could two teenagers crash our entire system? I don't know, but they want us to delete any records of the incident. All of it. Security footage, boarding pass verifications, everything. Melissa glanced around nervously. Why would we do that unless they're connected to someone important? Richard finished for her. Just do it. I'll handle security. As they hurriedly began covering their tracks, neither noticed Diego watching from nearby, recording everything on his phone. Outside the terminal, news vans were beginning to arrive, drawn by reports of the unprecedented airline shutdown. Among them was a sleek black SUV, with tinted windows. The driver, a woman in a tailored suit, spoke quietly into her earpiece. Eagle has landed, proceeding to medical bay. Inside the vehicle, Carlos Hernandez closed his laptop. Time to see my children, he said to no one in particular, his voice both tender and dangerous. In the medical center, Miguel received one final message from his father. Yo, I'm here. Asterisk Miguel and Lucia exchanged glances, a mixture of relief and apprehension on their young faces. Their father was a loving but distant figure in their lives, always providing, always protecting, but rarely present. Now he was about to make an entrance that would change everything. Is that him? Lucia whispered, nodding toward the entrance where a tall, imposing figure had appeared, flanked by serious-looking men and women in professional attire. Miguel nodded, a lump forming in his throat. That's Dad. Carlos Hernandez strode into the medical center with the confident gait of a man who owned every inch of ground beneath his feet. His tailored suit was impeccable, his face impassive, except for the slight softening of his eyes when they landed on his children. Miguel, Lucia, he said simply, his deep voice carrying across the room. The siblings rose to meet him, suddenly unsure whether to embrace him or stand at attention. Carlos solved the dilemma by opening his arms, and they rushed into his embrace. I'm sorry it took me so long, he murmured into their hair, but I'm here now. After a moment he released them and turned his attention to Carmen, who was watching the family reunion with interest. Mrs. Vasquez, he said with a respectful nod. I understand my children have been keeping you company. I hope you're receiving proper care now. Carmen studied him curiously. Mr. Hernandez, I see where your son gets his intensity. Yes, your children have been exemplary, far better than the staff of your airline. Not for much longer, Carlos replied grimly. Rest assured this ends today. He turned to one of his associates, a stern-looking woman with a tablet. Begin phase 2. I want every employee involved in today's incident assembled at gate A7 in 15 minutes. Every single one. As the woman nodded and stepped away to make calls, Carlos addressed his children again. Are you two ready for what comes next? This won't be pleasant. Miguel straightened his shoulders. We're ready, Dad. They need to be held accountable. Lucia hesitated, then nodded. I just want them to understand what they did wrong, so it doesn't happen to anyone else. Carlos's expression softened slightly at his daughter's compassion. Understanding will come, one way or another. He checked his watch. It's time. Let's go. As Carlos and his entourage prepared to leave, Carmen called out, "Mr. Hernandez." Carlos turned one eyebrow raised inquiringly. "Make it count," Carmen said simply. Carlos nodded once, then led his children out of the medical center and toward Gate A7, where their confrontation with the airline staff awaited. Chapter 5. The Phoenix Rises. As they walked through the terminal, passengers and airport employees stopped to stare at the procession, some recognizing Carlos, taking out their phones to record the mogul's unexpected appearance. In Carlos's ear, a voice reported, "Sir Melissa Matthews and Richard Wilson are attempting to leave the premises. Security has been instructed to hold them at the gate." "Perfect," Carlos replied quietly. Into his earpiece, he added, "Stage 2, begin shutdown protocol." Throughout the terminal, lights flickered as the airport's backup generators kicked in. On every display screen, the airline's logo was replaced by the Vestige Holdings emblem, a phoenix rising from ashes. The message was clear. A new power had taken control. In a quiet corner of the Atlantic Airways employee break room, Richard Wilson sat alone, his head in his hands. The chaos unfolding throughout the terminal seemed distant compared to the turmoil in his own mind. On his phone, he repeatedly watched the security footage of himself confronting Miguel and Lucia earlier that day. "Why didn't I just check their damn tickets?" he muttered to himself, rewinding the footage to watch his own dismissive gestures, his refusal to make eye contact with the teenagers. The way he treated them reminded him painfully of another failure in his life. 8 years ago, Richard had lost his only son, Marcus, to a heroin overdose. Marcus had been 16, Miguel's age, when Richard had kicked him out of the house after discovering drugs in his room. Tough love, he told himself then. Marcus had died alone in a shelter 3 months later. Every time Richard saw young Hispanic men Miguel's age, something in him reacted with a mixture of grief and judgment. It was easier to assume the worst than to remember his own failures as a father. A notification appeared on his screen. An all-staff message ordering personnel involved in the Hernandez incident to report to Gate A17 immediately. Richard felt his stomach drop. Hernandez. The name hadn't registered earlier, but now the connection was clear. Those kids were Carlos Hernandez's children. "I'm finished," he whispered to the empty room. In another part of the terminal, Diego Rodriguez wheeled his janitorial cart toward an employees-only door. At 26, Diego had the easygoing demeanor of someone who could blend into any background, becoming effectively invisible to those who didn't bother to look closely. This quality had served him well over the 3 years he'd worked at the Phoenix airport since dropping out of his logistics management program at State University. Diego swiped his badge and entered the staff corridor, quickly navigating to a small server room. Once inside, he locked the door behind him and pulled a laptop from beneath the supplies in his cart. Within minutes, he had connected to the airline's internal network, a trick he'd learned during his college days. "Access granted," he murmured with satisfaction as employee files appeared on his screen. He quickly began downloading personnel records, customer complaint histories, and internal memos about passenger profiling protocols. The documents painted a disturbing picture of systemic bias within the airline's operations. As the files transferred, Diego sent a text message to a contact listed simply as N**, got everything. "Meeting at Gate A17 is happening now. You might want to get over here." The recipient of that message, Nora Jimenez, was already on her way. At 34, Nora had established herself as one of the most respected investigative journalists in the city. She was also Carmen Vasquez's niece, though few people made that connection professionally. In the newsroom of the City Tribune, Nora had been about to head home when the first reports of the Atlantic Airways shutdown began flooding social media. A colleague had shown her a viral video of an elderly woman collapsing at a security checkpoint, her own aunt. Now, Nora was in a taxi heading to the airport, her press credentials ready and her recorder running. Her phone pinged with Diego's message. "Gate A17, she instructed the driver. "And hurry." Meanwhile, in a secluded VIP lounge requisitioned by Carlos's team, Miguel and Lucia sat across from their father as he briefed them on what would happen next. "The confrontation will be public," Carlos explained. "I want witnesses. I want accountability." He looked at Miguel. "Those recordings you made, they're admissible and legally obtained. I'm proud of your foresight." Miguel nodded, a surge of warmth spreading through his chest at his father's praise. "I just did what you taught us." Carlos turned to Lucia. "This will be difficult for you, I know. You've always been compassionate, like your mother." His voice caught slightly on the last word, but sometimes justice requires discomfort. Lucia nodded, though uncertainty lingered in her eyes. "I understand, but Dad, what happens to the people who did this? To Melissa and Richard?" "That depends on them," Carlos replied carefully. "On whether they can acknowledge their actions and commit to change." A knock at the door interrupted them. One of Carlos's aides entered, tablet in hand. "Sir, we've received an interesting development. Someone from inside the airline has leaked documents to a journalist, extensive evidence of racial profiling, not just in this incident, but system-wide." Carlos raised an eyebrow. "Who's the journalist?" "Nora Jimenez from the City Tribune." Miguel's eyes widened. "Jimenez, as in Carmen's niece?" "Exactly." Carlos finished, a small smile playing at his lips. "This day gets more interesting by the minute." He stood, straightening his tie. "It's time." Gate A17, once designated for their departure, had been transformed into an impromptu tribunal. Airline staff, including Melissa and Richard, stood nervously near the counter, while Carlos's security team maintained a perimeter. Passengers gathered at a respectful distance, sensing that something unprecedented was unfolding. Some had their phones out, recording. As Carlos approached with his children, the crowd parted like water. In the sudden quiet, his footsteps echoed against the polished floor. He stopped directly in front of the gate, surveying the assembled staff with an unnervingly calm expression. "I'd like to speak with the gate manager," he announced, his voice carrying without effort. Richard stepped forward, his earlier arrogance replaced by thinly veiled fear. "I'm the floor supervisor," he said, not quite meeting Carlos's eyes. "Richard Wilson," Carlos stated rather than asked. "Yes, sir, you work for me." Richard blinked in confusion. "Sir? You work for me," Carlos repeated. "As of 3 months ago, when Vestige Holdings acquired a controlling interest in Atlantic Airways, I am your majority shareholder, your chairman, and effectively your boss." He gestured toward Miguel and Lucia. "And these are my children whom you humiliated, discriminated against, and attempted to remove from my airline earlier today." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Melissa, standing slightly behind Richard, visibly paled. At that moment, a woman with a press badge pushed through the crowd, followed by a cameraman. "Nora Jimenez, City Tribune," she announced, holding up a recorder. "Mr. Hernandez, would you care to comment on the unprecedented grounding of Atlantic Airways' entire fleet?" Carlos smiled thinly. "Perfect timing, Miss Jimenez. I was just about to address that." He turned to face both the assembled staff and the growing audience of travelers. "Today, my children experienced something that no passenger should ever face: discrimination based on the color of their skin." Melissa stepped forward, her professional mask firmly in place. "Sir, there's been a misunderstanding. We were simply following security protocols." "Save it," Miguel interrupted, surprising everyone, including himself, with the authority in his voice. "I recorded everything." He raised his smartwatch. "Including when you redirected us from the first-class line without checking our tickets, when you accused us of having fake boarding passes, and when you called security to have us removed." As Miguel spoke, Diego emerged from the crowd, positioning himself near Nora. Something in his posture caught Lucia's attention, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there earlier when he was pushing his janitorial cart. Carlos continued, "While my son was recording your visible misconduct, my systems were recording something else." the deliberate cancellation of their valid tickets after they walked away, the security flags added to their profiles without cause, and the internal communications suggesting this was standard procedure rather than an isolated incident. Richard attempted to defend himself. "Mr. Hernandez, with all due respect, your children were being aggressive, were they?" Carlos raised an eyebrow. He gestured to a nearby screen, which suddenly displayed crystal-clear footage from Miguel's smartwatch. The video showed the entire interaction, including Richard's dismissive behavior and thinly veiled threats. As the footage played, Miguel stepped forward. "I also captured audio you didn't know I was recording." He tapped his watch again, and Richard's voice filled the gate area. Make sure they're escorted out before they cause more trouble." The crowd murmured in shock and disgust. Richard's face contorted with a mixture of shame and defiance. "This isn't just about my children," Carlos continued. "This is about a pattern of behavior that has gone unchecked for too long." He nodded to another aide, who distributed tablets to the senior staff members present. "On these devices, you'll find documentation of over 300 similar incidents in the past year alone, all conveniently categorized as security concerns rather than what they really are. Racial profiling." As the executive scrolled through the damning evidence, phones began ringing throughout the group. One of them, a woman in a tailored suit, who had flown in from headquarters, whispered urgently to her colleague, "3 board members just resigned, effective immediately. The stock is in free fall." Nora, who had been recording everything, stepped closer to Lucia. "Would you be willing to share your experience on camera?" she asked quietly. "People need to hear this from you directly." Lucia hesitated, looking to her father and brother for guidance. Miguel nodded encouragingly, but Carlos remained neutral, allowing her to make her own choice. Before Lucia could decide, a message arrived on Nora's phone. She glanced at it, then looked up with renewed purpose. "My aunt, Carmen Vasquez, was also profiled by your staff today," she announced to the assembled airline representatives. "She collapsed after being forced to stand unnecessarily by your security personnel, despite her obvious physical limitations." This revelation caused another ripple of shock through the crowd. Nora continued, her voice steady but charged with emotion. "She just sent me a statement from her hospital bed, documenting years of similar treatment from this airline and others." As these developments unfolded, Melissa attempted to slip away, edging toward the exit. Miguel noticed and alerted his father with a subtle nod. Carlos's voice cut through the commotion like a blade. "Melissa Matthews." She froze, then slowly turned back to face him. "Your employment with Atlantic Airways Airlines is terminated, effective immediately," Carlos stated, his tone leaving no room for appeal. "You've failed this company and its values. You're done." A spontaneous cheer erupted from the crowd of onlookers, many of whom had experienced or witnessed similar discrimination during their own travels. Melissa's face flushed with humiliation as security personnel approached to escort her from the premises. As she was led away, Miguel caught her eye. For a brief moment, there was no satisfaction in his expression, only a solemn acknowledgement of consequence. With the attention of the entire terminal now focused on Gate A17, Carlos delivered his final bombshell. "As of this moment, I am shutting down Atlantic Airways operations for 48 hours, he announced. "During this time, we will conduct a full audit of the airline's hiring practices, customer service protocols, and management structure. Those found to have engaged in discriminatory behavior will be removed. Those who stood by and allowed it to happen will be retrained or reassigned." The terminal erupted in a mixture of applause and concerned murmurs from affected travelers. "Passengers will be rebooked on partner airlines at our expense," Carlos continued, anticipating their concerns. "Hotel accommodations will be provided for those with significant delays. This is not about punishing our customers, it's about ensuring that when operations resume, every passenger can expect to be treated with the dignity and respect they deserve, regardless of the color of their skin." As his father addressed the crowd, Miguel noticed something unexpected. Richard, standing alone now with tears streaming down his face. The man's tough exterior had cracked, revealing something broken underneath. For a moment, Miguel felt an unexpected pang of empathy. Lucia, ever observant, followed her brother's gaze and whispered, "People are complicated, even the ones who hurt us." Miguel nodded slowly, the truth of her words sinking in. Maybe that's the hardest part of all this, knowing that they're just people, making terrible choices. Chapter 6. Transformations. As Darius concluded his address and began fielding questions from the press, Miguel and Lucia found themselves at the center of a story that was already spreading across social media and news outlets nationwide. Their private humiliation had become a public reckoning, their personal pain transformed into a catalyst for change. And somewhere in the crowd, Diego smiled quietly to himself, knowing that the evidence he had been collecting for years had finally found its way to people who could use it to make a difference. The crowd at Gate A17 had grown from dozens to hundreds, travelers with delayed flights, curious airport staff, and an increasing number of media personnel formed a semicircle around the impromptu confrontation. Carlos Hernandez stood at the center of it all, an imposing figure whose presence commanded the terminal. For those just joining us, Carlos addressed the crowd, his voice carrying effortlessly, "I'd like to speak with someone in charge of gate operations." His eyes fixed directly on Richard, who still stood frozen several feet away. Richard stepped forward reluctantly, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. "As I said, I'm the floor supervisor for this terminal, sir." Carlos approached him slowly, stopping just close enough to make Richard uncomfortable. "Then you're the person who instructed your staff to racially profile my children." A murmur ran through the crowd, several phones rose higher to capture the exchange. Richard's mouth opened and closed before he found his voice. "Sir, we were following protocol for suspicious." Carlos cut him off. What exactly was suspicious about two teenagers with valid first-class tickets? Before Richard could respond, Carlos turned toward the crowd. "Would anyone like to guess what made my children appear suspicious?" Silence fell across the terminal. "I'll tell you what made them suspicious," Carlos continued, his voice dangerously quiet. "The same thing that has made me suspicious in stores, in restaurants, and yes, in airports, despite the fact that I own this airline." He paused. "The color of their skin." Miguel and Lucia stood slightly behind their father, watching the confrontation unfold. Miguel maintained his composure, but Lucia fidgeted nervously, uncomfortable with the growing spectacle. "You work for me," Carlos reminded Richard. "Every employee in this airline works for me, and yet my children were treated like criminals in my own establishment." Nora Jimenez, positioning herself at an optimal angle, continued recording as her cameraman captured the confrontation. She had been tipped off by Diego, and her journalistic instincts told her this story was bigger than one incident. "Mr. Hernandez," she called out, "would you say this is an isolated incident or part of a pattern?" Carlos glanced toward her, recognizing the strategic nature of the question. "Miss Jimenez, I believe your aunt could answer that better than I could." Nora's professional demeanor faltered slightly at the direct reference to her relationship with Carmen. "For those unaware," Carlos continued, "Miss Vasquez, who was mistreated by the same staff earlier today, is the aunt of this journalist. The same staff who denied my children entry, then failed to accommodate an elderly woman with mobility issues." Richard attempted to interject. "Sir, the situation with Miss Vasquez was handled by TSA, not our." "Don't," Carlos' single word cut through the air like a blade. "Do not attempt to deflect responsibility when your staff stood by and watched an elderly woman collapse." During this exchange, Melissa had been trying to blend into the background, edging slowly toward an employee exit. Miguel noticed and suddenly tapped his father's arm. "Melissa Matthews," Carlos called without turning around. "Please join us. Your perspective as the first point of contact with my children would be valuable." Melissa froze, then reluctantly returned to the center of attention. Her customer service smile was firmly in place, though her eyes betrayed her fear. "Mr. Hernandez," she began, her voice professionally modulated, "there seems to be a misunderstanding. I was simply following standard procedure." Miguel interrupted, stepping forward. He held up his smartwatch. "I recorded everything, including what you said when you thought we couldn't hear you." Melissa's smile faltered. Miguel tapped his watch, and Melissa's voice emerged clearly from the device. What kind of rich dad lets their street kids run wild like this? Probably stole someone's credit card to book those tickets. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Melissa's face drained of color. Carlos's expression remained unchanged, but his eyes hardened. Miss Matthews, in light of your comments and actions, your employment with Atlantic Airways is terminated, effective immediately. Melissa's professional mask cracked completely. You can't just, I can, and I have. Carlos stated firmly, security will escort you to collect your belongings. As two security officers approached to escort Melissa away, cheers erupted from several onlookers. Melissa's humiliation was complete as she was led through the crowd, head down, avoiding the judgmental stares of passengers she'd once lorded over. Richard, witnessing Melissa's dismissal, attempted a different approach. Mr. Hernandez, our staff handles thousands of passengers daily. Mistakes happen, but we're not aggressive. Miguel interjected, playing another recording. Richard's voice filled the gate area. Asterisk. They don't belong here. Make sure they're escorted out before they cause more trouble. Richard fell silent, his face ashen. Carlos turned to his son with pride, evident in his expression. Your foresight saved us a lot of denials today. He returned his attention to Richard. Were you going to claim you weren't aggressive, Mr. Wilson, that you didn't prejudge my children based on their appearance? Richard, realizing his position was untenable, finally abandoned his defenses. What do you want from me? He asked, his voice hollow. Accountability, Carlos replied simply, starting with an acknowledgement of what you did. While this confrontation unfolded, Lucia stood slightly apart, observing not just the main players but the reactions of those watching. She noticed how some passengers nodded in agreement with her father, while others looked uncomfortable, perhaps recognizing similar behaviors in themselves. She also saw the airline staff's varying reactions. Some were rightfully ashamed, others resentful, and a few seemed genuinely regretful. Her artistic eye captured these expressions, mentally sketching the complex emotions playing across faces throughout the terminal. This wasn't just about punishing Richard and Melissa, it was about confronting a deeper societal issue that played out daily in spaces like this. Nora approached Lucia, while her father continued addressing the crowd. Would you be willing to share your perspective? She asked gently. People need to hear this from you too, not just your father. Lucia hesitated, glancing toward Miguel, who gave her an encouraging nod. I'm not sure, she replied softly. Everyone's watching, that's precisely why your voice matters, Nora responded. This isn't just about one airline or one incident. Before Lucia could decide, her attention was drawn to her phone. A message had arrived from the medical center. Carmen had recorded a statement from her hospital bed and sent it directly to Nora. The journalist quickly reviewed the footage on her tablet. Carmen's dignified voice captured the terminal's attention as Nora played the recording. Asterisk. Today was not my first experience with discrimination while traveling, nor will it be the last for people who look like me. But today, something different happened. Today, someone with power finally said, enough. Asterisk. The crowd fell silent, listening to the elderly woman's testimony about decades of similar treatment, being redirected from first-class lines, subjected to random security checks, and having medical needs ignored or minimized. As Carmen's recording concluded, Carlos made his most dramatic announcement yet. In light of these revelations and the clear evidence of systemic issues within our company culture, I am temporarily shutting down Atlantic Airways operations. Shocked gasps spread through the terminal. Airline executives who had rushed to the scene looked horrified. For the next 48 hours, Carlos continued, all Atlantic Airways flights worldwide will be grounded while we conduct a comprehensive audit of our hiring practices, customer service protocols, and management structure. One executive pushed forward. You can't do this. The financial implications are significant, Carlos acknowledged, but not as significant as the human cost of allowing these practices to continue. He turned to address the worried passengers. All affected travelers will be rebooked on partner airlines at our expense, with appropriate compensation for delays. While chaos erupted among the executives, Miguel observed Richard standing alone, shoulders slumped in defeat. Despite everything, Miguel felt an unexpected twinge of empathy. The man had been cruel, yes, but he was also a product of a system that rewarded such behavior. In that moment, Miguel made a decision that would later prove significant. He approached Richard while everyone's attention was focused on his father. "Why did you do it?" Miguel asked quietly. Richard looked up, surprised by the direct question from the teenager he'd mistreated. "Do what? Treat us like that? Without even checking our tickets first? You must have known there was a chance we were legitimate passengers." Richard held Miguel's gaze for a moment before looking away. "You reminded me of someone," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "My son. He was about your age when I—" He trailed off, unable to finish. Before Miguel could respond, his father called for him. The conversation would have to wait, but something had shifted, a small crack in the wall between accuser and accused, a glimpse of the complicated humanity behind the discrimination. As security personnel began ushering airline staff away for questioning and processing, Carlos put his arms around his children's shoulders. "You've both shown extraordinary courage today," he told them. "Your mother would be proud." Lucia leaned into her father's embrace. "Do you think this will change anything, Dad? Really change things?" Carlos looked down at his daughter, his expression softening. "Change doesn't happen overnight, sweetheart, but sometimes it needs a catalyst." He glanced around at the media recording every moment. "Today, we provided that catalyst." The image of the powerful Hispanic CEO standing with his teenage children in the middle of the airport terminal, having just grounded an entire airline over racial profiling, was already spreading across social media platforms nationwide. By morning, it would be international news. As they walked away from Gate 17, Miguel glanced back one last time. Richard was being escorted to a meeting room by Carlos's staff, his future uncertain. Melissa was nowhere to be seen, and throughout the terminal, conversations about race, privilege, and accountability had begun among strangers who might never have discussed such topics otherwise. The Hernandez family had turned a moment of humiliation into a reckoning, and this was just the beginning. Chapter 7: Legacy of Dignity. The 48 hours following Carlos Hernandez's announcement became known in aviation circles as the grounding. Atlantic Airways stock plummeted 37% in the first day alone. Financial news channels ran continuous coverage of what analysts were calling unprecedented corporate self-regulation. In the glass-walled boardroom of Atlantic Airways headquarters, chaos reigned. Emergency meetings stretched through the night as executives strategized damage control. The CEO, William Palmer, had aged years in a single day, his usual tan fading to a sickly pallor. "He can't just shut us down," Palmer shouted, slamming his fist on the polished table. "We have shareholders to answer to." "He is the majority shareholder," the company's legal counsel reminded him quietly, "and the evidence he's presenting would sink us in court anyway." "What evidence?" demanded a senior vice president. A few recorded comments, some kid's smartwatch footage. The room fell silent as the door opened. A young IT specialist entered, looking nervous. "Sir, there's something you should know. The whistleblower. We've identified him." All attention turned to the specialist. "Well, who is it?" Palmer demanded. "Diego Rodriguez, a janitor. But he's not just a janitor. He's been systematically archiving deleted customer complaints for 3 years. Thousands of them, sir, all related to racial profiling incidents." The executives exchanged horrified glances. One woman closed her eyes briefly, whispering, "Those complaints were supposed to be permanently deleted." "Nothing's ever permanently deleted," the IT specialist replied grimly, and Rodriguez knew exactly what he was doing. "He has copies of everything, including the internal memos directing staff to prioritize certain passenger profiles for additional screening." Palmer collapsed into his chair. "We're finished." Across town, in a modest apartment, Diego sat at his kitchen table with Nora Jimenez, reviewing the materials he'd collected over the years. "How did you know to start saving these?" Nora asked, scrolling through meticulously organized files. Diego's expression darkened. 3 years ago, my grandmother was traveling to see me graduate. She's from Guatemala. doesn't speak much English. They pulled her aside, made her miss her connection. By the time she arrived, the ceremony was over. He shrugged. I was already working here part-time. After that I started paying attention. And you kept working there all this time? Diego gave her a half smile. Sometimes you need to be inside the system to change it. I wasn't sure what I'd do with all this, but I knew someday the right opportunity would come along. Well, Nora said, today's that day. She gestured to her laptop, where her preliminary story was taking shape. The headline read, Systemic Discrimination Exposed, Whistleblower Reveals Years of Racial Profiling at Major Airline. Meanwhile, at the Hernandez residence, a spacious penthouse with views of the city skyline, Miguel sat alone in his room, scrolling through the chaos unfolding online. Atlantic Airways' shutdown was trending nationwide. Videos of the confrontation at the gate had been viewed millions of times. Some commenters hailed the Hernandezes as heroes exposing corporate racism. Others criticized Carlos for what they called an overreaction and abuse of power. The most disturbing comments, however, were those attacking Miguel and Lucia directly, calling them privileged, spoiled, and worse. Anonymous accounts were posting doctored videos, manipulating the footage to make it appear that the siblings had been aggressive or disrespectful. One particularly vicious post showed a crudely edited clip of Miguel shoving an airline employee, something that had never happened. Miguel's finger hovered over the video he'd recorded of Melissa mocking them. He hadn't shared this particular clip publicly yet. Part of him wanted to upload it immediately to silence the critics who were painting him and Lucia as entitled troublemakers. There was a soft knock at his door. Lucia entered, her sketchbook clutched to her chest. "You okay?" she asked, sitting beside him on the bed. Miguel showed her the doctored video. "They're trying to make us look bad." Lucia studied the fake footage, then shook her head. "That's not even good editing. Your shirt changes color halfway through." Despite everything, Miguel laughed. Leave it to his artist sister to notice a detail like that. "I want to release the clip of Melissa," he admitted. "The one where she calls us street kids and says we stole credit cards." Lucia frowned slightly. "Why haven't you?" "I don't know, I guess." Miguel hesitated. "It feels different now. She's already been fired. Everyone already knows what happened." "You're thinking about growth," Lucia observed. "About giving people room to learn from their mistakes." Miguel looked surprised at his sister's insight. "Maybe, or maybe I just don't want to pour more fuel on the fire." Lucia opened her sketchbook, showing him a drawing she'd been working on, a powerful rendering of Melissa's face, half in shadow, capturing both her cruelty and her humanity. "People aren't just one thing," Lucia said quietly. "Dad says justice isn't about destruction, it's about correction." Miguel considered his sister's words, then making a decision, he uploaded the video anyway. "Some corrections need to be public," he said firmly. "For the others who might think twice next time." Lucia looked disappointed, but didn't argue. Within minutes, the clip had been shared thousands of times. Elsewhere in the city, in a luxury hotel suite, serving as Carlos's temporary command center, a different drama was unfolding. Reports of a potential board coup had reached him. Several executives were trying to rally votes to remove him as chairman, arguing that the shutdown constituted a breach of fiduciary duty. Carlos received the news with calm detachment. "They're 3 votes short," he told his chief of staff, "and they always will be." "How can you be so sure, sir?" Carlos smiled thinly. "Because the moment I learned what happened to my children, I transferred 15% of my shares to a trust controlled by loyalists. The board can't touch me now." His phone buzzed with a notification. Miguel had uploaded the video of Melissa's comments. Carlos watched it once, his expression unreadable, then set the phone aside. "Sir," his assistant prompted, "should we include this in our press materials?" "No," Carlos replied after a moment. "My son made his choice. We'll let it stand on its own." In a small supply closet at the airport terminal, Richard Wilson sat alone, his uniform jacket discarded on the floor beside him. Tears streamed down his face as he stared at an old photo on his phone, a teenage boy with his same eyes smiling at the camera. "I'm sorry, Marcus," he whispered to the image of his deceased son. "I've been so angry for so long." The door opened suddenly, flooding the dark space with light. Nora Hernandez stood in the doorway, recorder in hand. "Mr. Wilson," she said, surprised to find the supervisor in such a state. Richard quickly wiped his eyes, embarrassed to be caught crying. "What do you want? More footage for your exposé?" Nora studied him for a moment, then made a decision. She turned off her recorder and sat down on an overturned bucket across from him. "Tell me about it," she said simply. "Off the record, just human to human." Richard looked up, confused by the unexpected compassion. "Why would you listen to anything I have to say after what I did?" "Because understanding why matters almost as much as acknowledging what," Nora replied. "And because my aunt taught me that everyone deserves a chance to be heard." Something broke in Richard then. The defensive wall he'd maintained crumbled completely. "I had a son," he began, his voice cracking. He would have been just about that boy's age now. As Richard spoke, Nora listened without judgment. The story that emerged was one of loss, regret, and misdirected pain. A father who had failed his son, then projected that failure onto every young Hispanic man who reminded him of what he'd lost. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Carlos had gone to visit Carmen. He entered her room carrying a small arrangement of yellow roses. "Mr. Hernandez," Carmen greeted him, sitting up straighter in her bed. "I didn't expect a personal visit." "Please, call me Carlos," he replied, placing the flowers on her bedside table. "I wanted to apologize personally for what happened today." Carmen waved her hand dismissively. "You're not responsible for every employee's actions. As majority owner, I am," Carlos said firmly. "But more importantly, I should have recognized how deep these issues went in my own company." Carmen studied him thoughtfully. "You know, when my niece started reporting on corporate accountability, I told her to look for the ones who take responsibility, even when they could easily deflect it. Those are the ones who might actually change things." Carlos smiled slightly. "Your niece is an impressive journalist. She reminds me of my Lucia, sees right through to the heart of things." Their conversation was interrupted when Lucia herself arrived, carrying her sketchbook. She hesitated in the doorway when she saw her father. "Come in, sweetheart," Carlos called. "I was just telling Mrs. Vasquez how much you remind me of her niece." Lucia approached shyly and handed Carmen a sheet from her sketchbook. A beautiful drawing of Carmen surrounded by young travelers of all backgrounds, her expression wise and dignified. "This is how I see you," Lucia explained softly. "Teaching the next generation." Carmen took the drawing with trembling hands, tears welling in her eyes. "Child, you have a gift, not just for art but for seeing people as they could be, not just as they are." As Lucia accepted the praise with a modest smile, Carlos watched his daughter with newfound appreciation. In the midst of corporate collapse and public scandal, the quiet wisdom of a 14-year-old artist reminded everyone what truly mattered, seeing the humanity in each other, even when it was difficult. That evening, alone in his hotel room, Carlos stood before the mirror, confronting his own reflection. The man who stared back at him was powerful, wealthy, and influential, everything he had fought to become since losing Isabel. But had he become the very thing he'd sworn to fight? Cold, ruthless, and detached. The question haunted him as he picked up a small photo he always carried. Isabel holding newborn twins, her smile radiant despite her exhaustion. "Am I doing this right?" he whispered to her image. "Is justice what we're achieving here, or just revenge?" The photo, of course, offered no answers. But somewhere in the quiet room, Carlos felt something shift within him.